Hey folks, today we're going to be looking at the hero's journey as a preparation for reading the Odyssey and also for reading your outside reading book, whether that's Ender's Game, The Hunger Games, The Hobbit, or Treasure Island. All of the characters go on a hero's journey and you need to know what the hero's journey is. So I've got some classwork for you that will finish immediately, or that we'll work on immediately after this, and that'll probably be the entire period today. So just bear with me as I go through this, and we'll talk it through, and hopefully you understand it by the end. I will solicit a example from the class and go through that with everybody at the end, just to sort of make sure that everything makes sense. But if you have questions, write them down. We'll get to them. You can write them in the chat as we go through. So every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. In the beginning, an author sets up his or her hero or heroine, and that character's story, then the author throws something at the hero that is a great source of conflict and takes him or her into a whole heap of trouble. After facing many foes and overcoming various obstacles, the hero saves the day and gets rewarded. As preparation for the understanding of the Odyssey in either The Hunger Games, Ender's Game, The Hobbit, or Treasure Island, we're going to study archetypal story structure in class. We'll read the following passage carefully, then individually or with a partner, you'll complete the classwork at the end. I guess I already said that, so it's sort of repetitive. Whatever. I'll also attach this document to the page so that you can read along if that's easier for you. So we're going to be looking at the hero's journey. It's the mythic structure of this guy Joseph Campbell's monomyth. So there's some words there that we should probably look at. Joseph Campbell, here's his Wikipedia page, and my face is directly over his name. Joseph Campbell was an American professor of literature who worked in comparative mythology and comparative religion. His work covers many aspects of human existence. His best-known work was a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, published in 1949, in which he discusses basically his theory that, and I'll say it in my own words instead of reading Wikipedia to you, his theory was essentially that there's a structure, a story that is the human story, that all human beings tell in repeated variations and versions throughout our existence, and that this is what he calls a monomyth. Mono is one, right? Like the one myth for all cultures is what monomyth essentially means. And so that if you could look at the myths and the stories of all human cultures, you could start to find these patterns in them. But they almost always follow the same pattern or the same trajectory from beginning to end. And so he spent his time studying this, and he wrote a book. It's called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, because the idea is that we really, as humans, have one hero. We have one story that we tell, and we just tell it in variations over and over again. So this hero has taken a form 1,000 times in 1,000 cultures, and you know, that's sort of the background idea. And this is a really, really influential book. It was, you can see it was published in 49. It was a book that was incredibly influential to a particular person who you may have heard the name of. His name was George Lucas. George Lucas read this book and fell in love with it and used it as a foundation for writing his own mythology, his own fantasy story called Star Wars. And so the whole Star Wars universe, in a lot of ways, certainly the first 3 movies, and in fact all of them when you look at them, follow this mythic structure. So I think that's interesting too. Let me put myself back in the corner and we'll go back to the hero's journey. So this is taken from a piece of writing by a guy named Dan Bronzeit, and I edited it. It's got my additions and changes to make it more appropriate for our class. But you can go out there and look at it. The only complaint I really have about Mr. Bronzeit and the way that he wrote it is that he always refers to the hero as him. It's gendered as male throughout. It is what it is. So, you know, heroes can be any gender. Let's not pretend it's always male. So, the 12 stages of the hero's journey. A popular form of structure derived from Joseph Campbell's monomyth from his book The Hero with a Thousand Faces. This, I'm gonna zoom in if I can. Hold on, let me pause this and zoom in. I feel like the words are too small. Hopefully that's a little better. A popular form of structure derived from Joseph Campbell's monomyth from his book The Hero with a Thousand Faces. This was a very groundbreaking book on the study of mythology published in 1949, in which Campbell outlined his theory that there's a basic human story that runs through all cultures in roughly the same form. The human story can be broken down into 12 stages. It's the lunch bell. you know, we'll just let it finish. That often happen in a preset order, but sometimes fluctuate depending on the story. A graphic of the hero's journey might look like this. You can come back to this graphic and look at it again as time goes on if you want to. But you have your hero. He starts in his ordinary world. He has a call to adventure. He meets a mentor. He crosses the threshold from the normal world into the unknown world. He has trials and failures and finds some helpers. He gains new skills. He goes through a really, really dangerous challenge where he gets reborn in some sort of real or metaphorical way, learns important things about himself, changes fundamentally who he is, makes up for the mistakes that he made earlier, earns a reward for it, and then returns to the normal world. And this story is stable across cultures. This is essentially what Campbell identified as the human story. So on the following pages, I'll try to explain each of the stages of the journey, and I'll use the well-known film Pixar's Cars to show it in action. I'm the one who put the Cars examples in there. Those are entirely me. So we're going to look at each of the stages of the hero's journey here, and we'll go through each of them for you. 1, ordinary world. This is where the hero exists before his present story begins, oblivious of the adventures to come. It's his safe place, his everyday life where we learn crucial details about our hero, his true nature, capabilities, and outlook on life. This anchors the hero as a human, just like you and me, and makes it easier for us to identify with him and hence later empathize with his plight. So it's important that we see the hero in their ordinary world so we get to see who they are and that they're just like us. In the movie Cars, Lightning McQueen is a race car on the Piston Cup circuit. He's young, he's arrogant, he's desperate to win it all and become the spokesman for Dynaco. I love that the gas company is Dynaco because of the fossil fuel. His ordinary world is the racetrack. Speed. He is speed, right? Like you get that image in the first couple scenes of Cars. And that gives you his ordinary world. So then we move on to stage 2, which is the call to adventure. The hero's adventure begins when he receives a call to action, such as a direct threat to his safety, his family, his way of life, or to the peace of the community in which he lives. It may not be as dramatic as a gunshot, but simply a phone call or conversation. But whatever the call is, and however it manifests itself, it ultimately disrupts the comfort of the hero's ordinary world and presents a challenge or quest that must be undertaken. And there's any number of these things, whether it's, I don't know, Harry Potter having an owl arrive at his house with a letter, or McQueen falling off his truck named Mac on the highway at night and finding himself in Radiator Springs, a much different world where he is an outsider. Almost every movie has this call to adventure moment. I don't know, young Peter Parker gets bit by a radioactive spider, right? Like it really doesn't matter how the moment manifests itself. It just shows up in almost every one of these stories. Then we have what's called the refusal of the call. Although the hero may be eager to accept the quest, at this stage, he will usually have fears that need overcoming, second thoughts, or even deep personal doubts as to whether or not he is up to the challenge. When this happens, the hero may refuse the call, and as a result may suffer somehow. The problem he faces may seem too much to handle, and the comfort of home far more attractive than the perilous road ahead. This would also be our own response, and once again helps us to bond further with the reluctant hero. So in the movie Cars, McQueen refuses the friendship of Mater, a friendly tow truck. He does not want to repave the road, and he plans to escape, and he even tries to flee when they remove the boot from his tire, right? Like he burns out of Radiator Springs. However, he runs out of gas and is taken back to Radiator Springs against his will. And so he tries to refuse the call, but he is forced back into the situation. Now, most of you at this point in your readings, whether it's The Hobbit or The Hunger Games or Ender's Game or Treasure Island, you have definitely reached this point. And most of you have probably reached the point of meeting the mentor or crossing the threshold at this stage. But hopefully you can already track these things going on in the stories that you're reading. You're introduced to your character in their normal world. They get called to adventure somehow. They don't want to. They have self-doubts. They're worried about it. And then they meet a mentor figure. It's a fun fact. The word mentor actually, as an older figure who helps to teach important lessons and train and be a guide to the young hero, that actually comes from the Odyssey. As we read the Odyssey, we're going to meet a figure whose name literally is mentor, and that's where this term comes from. So anyway, at this crucial turning point where the hero desperately needs guidance, he meets a mentor figure who gives him something he needs. He could be given an object of great importance, insight into the dilemma he faces, wise advice, practical training, or even self-confidence. Whatever the mentor provides the hero with, it serves to dispel his doubts and fears and give him the strength and courage to begin his quest. So technically, you know, in the story of Cars, Lightning McQueen has already met his mentor at the trial and sentencing, but now he's in a race with Doc Hudson on a dirt track, a race he expects to win, but loses in epic fashion, going off a cliff and, you know, running into a cactus. So Doc ends up being his mentor with racing, right? Like McQueen's a race car. He wants to win the Piston Cup. Doc is going to be the guy who teaches him the skills necessary to win that Piston Cup. However, I think it can also be argued that with his knowledge of Radiator Springs and a friendship, to be honest with you, that Mater is also a mentor to McQueen. So sometimes a story may have more than one mentor figure, and they both teach the character something different. But I think that clearly Doc Hudson is the obvious mentor choice in this story, and that Mater is sort of your secondary mentor choice. So then we have crossing the threshold. The hero is now ready to act upon his call to adventure and truly begin his quest, whether it be physical, spiritual, or emotional. He may go willingly, or he may be pushed, but either way he finally crosses the threshold between the world he is familiar with and that which he is not. It may be leaving home for the first time in his life, or just doing something that he always has been scared to do. However the threshold presents itself, this action signifies the hero's commitment to his journey and whatever it may have in store for him. Now, by the way, I put in parentheses here that this can be swapped with step 4 in some stories. Sometimes you meet the mentor, and the mentor helps push you over the threshold into this new world. Sometimes you enter the new world before you meet the mentor. In the case of Lightning McQueen, he entered Radiator Springs before he met Doc Hudson. And so you could argue that he's already in this other world before he meets the mentor. However, I would argue, like I say down here at the bottom, McQueen decides to work and does a good job with paving the road, beginning to realize that Radiator Springs isn't a bad place after all, and investing in getting to know some of the other inhabitants. So for me, McQueen as a character, yes, he goes from his ordinary world, the racetrack, to Radiator Springs, which is a different world, but he doesn't really cross the threshold until he decides to get to know the people in Radiator Springs. His ordinary world is a world of arrogance where he doesn't bother to get to know rusty cars or old cars or, you know, people who aren't involved in racing. And him stepping out of his comfort zone is actually making meaningful friendships and having meaningful relationships with other characters. And so for me, as a viewer of Cars, I see the crossing of the threshold actually being after he meets the mentor, but you could argue it the other way. And again, English doesn't have right or wrong answers. It's well argued and badly argued, and you just have to be able to make your case. However, again, we have some stories where the hero meets the mentor before he crosses the threshold, like Harry Potter. Harry meets this giant Hagrid, who I think serves as a mentor in the first book, and he meets him before he goes to Hogwarts, before he steps across into the wizarding world. So that would be an example of meeting the mentor before crossing the threshold. But in some other stories, and I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, like the Chronicles of Narnia, if you watched or read that, the kids actually cross through this wardrobe into Narnia, and then they meet Mr. Tumnus over there. So they've crossed the threshold before they meet the mentor. So, you know, like some of these can vary, and they can be in different orientations or locations depending on how the story works. So as you do the classwork later, keep in mind that you don't have to follow this in exactly the order. You can alternate the order if you think things happen in a different order, just so long as all the stages are there. Then we have trials, allies, and enemies. Now finally out of his comfort zone, the hero is confronted with an ever more difficult series of challenges that test him in a variety of ways. Obstacles are thrown across his path, whether they be physical hurdles or people bent on thwarting his progress. The hero must overcome each challenge he is presented with on the journey towards his ultimate goal. The hero needs to find out who can be trusted and who can't. He may earn allies and meet enemies who will, each in their own way, help prepare him for the greater ordeals yet to come. This is the stage where his skills and or powers are tested, and every obstacle that he faces helps us gain a deeper insight into his character and ultimately identify with him even more. So we're going to learn the hero's character flaws based on who they trust and who they don't trust and what actions they take during these trials. They will learn what they do well and what they don't do well. There's a lot of character development that happens here. So in the movie Cars, which we're tracking, in Radiator Springs, McQueen mostly finds allies. He becomes friends with Mater and Sally, but he has a close call with a Combine. I think his name's Frank. In a cornfield, and must win the trust of Red, the fire engine, and the love of Sally as well. So he has a series of these events. I'm kind of doing Harry Potter off the cuff as we go through this. If you're doing Harry Potter, like Harry, he met Hagrid, that was his mentor, but when he gets to Hogwarts, he meets Ron and Hermione. He meets Draco Malfoy, who becomes an enemy. He meets Snape and McGonagall and, like various characters, and these characters sort themselves out to be allies or enemies depending on, how the story turns out. And that's going to be true of almost every human story that you ever read. And it's certainly true also of your outside reading books, as Ender goes up to battle school, or as Katniss goes off to train for the Hunger Games, or as Bilbo starts his journey and starts to understand the companions he's with, or as Jim Hawkins gets on a ship and starts sailing to Treasure Island, we start to have all of these elements start working. So 7, develop new skills. The hero is beginning to look like he may have what it takes to accomplish his quest, but he's still missing key skills that will help him to be successful. Often these are taught to him by the mentor, but just as frequently they are gained through aid from an ally or experiences learned from trials and overcoming enemies. So in Radiator Springs, McQueen learns a lot. He learns that Doc Hudson was the Hudson Hornet, and he watches as Doc learns to drive. He watches Doc and learns to drive on dirt, right? You remember that scene. He learns backward driving from Mater, and he gets organic fuel from Fillmore and tires from Luigi. And then he also, I think most importantly, learns to treat others well and to trust in their abilities, advice, and experience. And so he begins to give up his arrogance and realize that other people have things to show him and that he can learn from them. He doesn't know everything he already needs to know. Which brings us to number 8, which is the weirdest name of any of them. And I think this one needs a little bit of explaining. Approach to the inmost cave. The inmost cave is a metaphor for self-doubt. Almost all human stories have this moment where the hero almost turns back on their path. Or they run into something that really shakes them foundationally as a human being. And in the monomyth by Campbell, that idea is called the inmost cave. So let me read it to you. The inmost cave may represent many things in the hero's story, such as an actual location in Greek myths, for example. It's literally the underworld. Odysseus is going to visit the underworld, where he's going to have an encounter with his dead mother, who he didn't know was dead, and this is going to put him into a really difficult state. So anyway, in Greek myths, sometimes literally the underworld, it's an actual location in which lies a terrible danger or an inner conflict. So it's often an inner conflict rather than an external conflict, which up until now the hero has not had to face. As the hero approaches the cave, real or metaphorical, he must make final preparations before taking that decisive leap into the great unknown. At the threshold to the inmost cave, the hero may once again face some doubts and fears that first surfaced upon his call to adventure. He may need some time to reflect upon his journey and the treacherous road ahead in order to find the courage to continue. This brief respite helps the audience to understand the magnitude of the ordeal that awaits the hero and escalates the tension in anticipation of his ultimate test. So, in our continued study of the movie Cars, Max shows up at Radiator Springs along with Harv on the phone and all of the press. And McQueen suddenly is in a position where he has to choose between staying with his new friends and completing his original quest to win the Piston Cup. He's torn between his old life and his new life. And this decision is going to impact his relationships. It's going to impact his future. And it's a hard one for him to make. You can see it. The music changes, the feel changes, the entire tone of the story changes at that moment, and that would be the approach to the Inmost Cave. Then we have 9, Ordeal, Death, and Resurrection. The supreme ordeal may be a dangerous physical test or a deep inner crisis that the hero must face in order to survive, or for the world in which the hero lives to continue to exist. Whether it be facing his greatest fear or most deadly foe, the hero must draw upon all of his skills and his experiences gathered upon the path to the Inmost Cave in order to overcome this most difficult challenge. Only through some form of death. Now, it doesn't have to be physical death. It could be metaphorical death. Can the hero be reborn, experiencing a metaphorical resurrection that somehow grants him greater power or insight necessary in order to fulfill his destiny or reach his journey's end? This is the high point of the hero's story, and where everything he holds dear is put on the line. If he fails, he will either die, or life as he knows it will never be the same again. So sometimes it's a physical challenge where there's actual physical fighting. That's very common in action books. In other stories, it's often a mental or emotional challenge where the hero has to overcome their greatest fear or their greatest obstacle, and their old self dies with all of the flaws that they had before, and a new self is reborn, one that is fundamentally different from who they were, and so their journey, their metaphorical internal journey, is almost complete at this point. If he fails, others will suffer, and this not only places more weight upon his shoulders, but it grips the audience so that they too feel part of the conflict and share the hero's hopes, fears, and trepidation. Ultimately, the hero will succeed, destroy his enemy, and emerge from the battle cleansed and reborn. The death here is usually metaphorical, cleansing away the last of the hero's negative character traits and allowing him to be reborn as a more perfect and satisfying to the audience self. So, in Cars, McQueen races the final race against Chick Hicks and Strip the King Weathers, the green car and the blue car. He is in position to win when Chick hits the King off the track and he wrecks, right? So McQueen here must choose between helping the old racer or winning the race and completing his quest. So he's got to sacrifice his old identity as a race car for his new identity as somebody who's caring and a good friend. And so he does. He loses the race, and he pushes the King over the line ahead of him. And this is the completion of his internal character arc, and the giving up of sort of the selfish desires that he had at the beginning of the story. Which brings us to number 10. Reward and Revelation. After defeating the enemy, surviving death, and finally overcoming his greatest personal challenge, the hero is ultimately transformed into a new state, emerging from the battle as a stronger person and often with a prize. The reward may come in many forms: an object of great importance or power, a secret, greater knowledge or insight, or even reconciliation with a loved one or ally. Whatever the treasure, which may well facilitate his return to the ordinary world, the hero must quickly put celebrations aside and prepare for the last leg of his journey. So, there are arguably a number of rewards for McQueen. He has the adulation of the crowd, like the crowd loves him. He's cemented his relationship with Sally. They can now, have a love relationship. He's also cemented his relationship with Doc. Doc wrecked, right? And by helping the King, he's sort of helped Doc get over his grumpy old persona. He's earned a place to live in Radiator Springs, but then he's also offered a job as the next car to represent Dynaco, even though he didn't win, because his actions were the kinds of actions that would represent the company well, right? And so there's a lot of rewards for McQueen here. We get to 11. There's only 2 more stages here. The Road Back. This is a stage in the hero's journey that represents a reverse of the call to adventure, in which the hero had to cross the first threshold. Now he's got to return home with his reward. But this time the anticipation of danger is replaced with that of acclaim and perhaps vindication, absolution, or even exoneration. Lots of big words there. You could use this for your vocab if you want to. But the hero's journey is not yet over, and he may still need one last push back into the ordinary world. The moment before the hero finally commits to the last stage of his journey may be a moment in which he must choose between his own personal objective and that of a higher cause. Again, McQueen has exchanged his old world for a new world. Radiator Springs becomes his home, the location of his racing headquarters, and his new ordinary world. He's realized that what he thought of as real, the Piston Cup circuit, the fame, the races, all of it is really artificial. It's just an empty cup, as he's told by Doc Hudson. and it distracts from the important things like love and friendship, neither of which he had before. So this one's a little interesting because he doesn't return to his old ordinary world. He makes his new world into his ordinary world. So there's a little bit of a nuance, I think, in what goes on in Cars. But a lot of stories, like Harry Potter, which we keep touching on, at the end, Harry Potter gets back on the train and goes back to Privet Drive to live with the Dursleys, which is his ordinary world. He himself is changed forever. He is not the same person who left, but the world that he goes back to is the same world. And that ties into our last stage, Return Changed. This is the final stage of the hero's journey in which the hero returns home to his ordinary world, a changed man. He will have grown as a person, learned many things, faced many terrible dangers, and even death, but now looks forward to start a new life. His return may bring fresh hope to those he left behind, a direct solution to their problems, or perhaps a new perspective for everyone to consider. The final reward that he obtains may be a literal or metaphorical reward. It could be a cause of celebration, self-realization, or an end to strife, but whatever it is, it represents three things: change, success, and proof of his journey. The return home also signals the need for resolution for the story's other key players. The hero's doubters will be ostracized, his enemies punished, and his allies rewarded. Ultimately, the hero will return to where he started, but things will clearly never be the same again. So, at the end, McQueen has Sally's love. He gets Mater a helicopter ride. He maintains his allegiance to Rust-eze, the company that gave him his big break, despite despising them at the start. He brings prosperity back to Radiator Springs, and the end credits montage shows that the town's problems are over, right? Sarge is helping SUVs in a wilderness camp. Fillmore is selling his organic fuel. Flo is selling a lot of gasoline. Ramon has customers in his paint shop. Luigi and Guido meet a Ferrari. It's a happy ending for McQueen and for the town. So hopefully that goes through and makes sense of it all. If you would like, I will take a suggestion of a Disney movie and I will run it through this whole thing, or I guess a Star Wars movie or something. I'll run it through this whole thing for you again just to make sure that you all understand it. Just let me know and I'll do that on Zoom for you. However, now you have a class assignment, and you can work alone on this, or you can work with a partner if you want to. That's fine with me as well. If you decide to work with a partner, make sure you get both names on the assignment that you turn in so I can put it in the grade book the right way. But now it's your turn. With a partner, or alone if you want, select a movie. It could be a Disney movie, a Marvel movie, a Lucasfilms movie. They all work really well, but any movie's fine. Or a book that you've read. And discuss how it follows the 12 stages of the hero's journey. Your job is to identify the protagonist and then write 1 to 3 sentences for each stage of the journey. There are 12 stages, showing how the hero goes through the various stages of the plot as the plot progresses. And what you're going to do is you're going to number and record your answers and turn it in before the end of class. And that's the assignment that follows this in the module. So if you have questions about that, ask, and if you want me to go through it with another example, ask me and I'll do that in Zoom. All right, thank you.